You're all very welcome to this, the second of our spring series of lectures by Kevin Myers. Kevin has entitled the programme, No Right to be Right, No Right to be Wrong. The second talk, Endgame for Feminism, he will present here this evening. It is important to point out from the outset that this is not a political event, but a social and cultural one. The Paris French Festival has, for the last 15 years, welcomed a wide variety of speakers from a wide range of backgrounds with diverse points of view. All our speakers are allowed to be heard. Castle Coot House is a place where intellectual freedom flourishes. We value diversity of thought, freedom of expression, and constructive dialogue. We ask that you not interrupt Kevin when he's speaking, and questions can be aired at our question and answer session immediately afterwards. We are, as I said already, very honoured Kevin has chosen Castle Coot House to open up the debate which has been seriously lacking in the public forum for some time now, not to mention his bringing awareness to issues that are not being covered by mainstream media, and his questioning and reasoning why. A social and cultural revolution is happening in Ireland by stealth. Open democratic debate is ruled out, and what we need now, more than ever, is informed and open discussion on the crucial issues. With the sometimes justified criticism of the Church in recent years, we often forget that they have been the catalyst for filtering down to us our Christian values. We have lost our Christian memory, according to Dr. Sean Brady, and there is now an urgency to counter the contemporary cultural amnesia regarding our Christian heritage in general and our Irish Christian heritage in particular. Maybe, as Kevin himself said, the answer is going to come from rural Ireland. And as we eagerly await the man himself, ladies and gentlemen, will you please give a warm welcome to Mr. Kevin Myers.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a real privilege and honour to be back here in Castle Coot on a lovely spring evening. And the introduction I had planned for you is not the introduction I'm going to give you, because, like you, I am in mourning for the loss of one of the great buildings of Europe, one of the great talismans of our Western Christian civilization, Notre Dame Cathedral. I woke up dreaming of Notre Dame this morning, and it was a bad dream. Notre Dame stands for so much of what we are losing so swiftly. And Notre Dame, as was, is gone. It's not the first time it was destroyed. It's largely forgotten it was destroyed during the French Revolution, when its spire was removed and it became a palace of civic justice. It's also been forgotten that during that time, in the Vendée, 200,000 Catholics were murdered by revolutionary forces, using the first techniques of genocide in Europe's history. These were flat-bottomed barges that were loaded with Catholic priests and nuns and recalcitrant Catholics who would not renege on their faith. And the barges were floated out into the Seine, and their flat bottoms were on hinges, the Loire, and the bottoms were on hinges, and when they got into the full tide of the river estuary, the bottoms were opened and the human cargo were dropped into the sea. And thousands and thousands and thousands of Catholics were killed by that method. And that was the consequence of the events of Paris in 1789. Let us hope Notre Dame can be reconstructed. Let us hope we can hold on to our Christian secular heritage. But the evidence that we can is not good. And one of the forces behind this, not by any means the sole force, has been the emergence of political feminism, which when it arrived, I welcomed. This is the second wave of feminism. And I thought nothing but good could come of the emergence of the liberation of women from the shackles of mammalian birth. The consequence of the forces that have been unleashed in Western Europe in the last 50 years is that Ireland, for the first time in its history, is no longer producing enough children to replace its existing population. In this regard, it is following the example of every single country in Western Europe. Without fail, every country is no longer producing enough children to replace its existing population. Each woman in any society has to have 2.1 children for that population to remain stable over any length of time into the next generation. 1.9 children on average per Irish woman, excluding immigration. Within 5 generations, the Irish population will have halved. That means to say that the numbers of Irish women will have halved. And the process of child reduction that results in families is exponential. Normally, small families procreate smaller families, so that the chances are that we will follow the example of the Iberian Peninsula, which stands to lose 60% of its population over the next 50 years of its indigenous population. I have always believed, and I still believe, in the right of women to have access to contraceptives, but there are consequences. In 1977, Spain legalized contraception rightly, and it took just 4 years for the Spanish population to cease to naturally reproduce itself. It fell below the 2.1 margin for every woman. Now, I do understand the irritation, the anger that many women feel that they are consigned to the onerous duties of childbirth when they see that men are freed of those onerous duties. But there's nothing fair about life, and there's nothing fair about being a mammal. The consequences of unlimited access to contraception and unlimited access to abortion and unlimited immigration has meant that only 45% of the population of London today is white British. 26% of all births in Britain last year were to foreign-born mothers. This is not to speak of women of non-British origins. I mentioned the last time I was speaking to you of the passage in New York State of a law that makes abortion within the period of 9 months of gestation lawful up to the point of birth. That is to say, it is lawful in New York State, while a mother's waters are breaking, to kill the child within that mother. And perhaps it's because of the experience that the French had with the revolution that an awful lot of the equipment that is used in abortions have French names. One is tet tir, which means head puller. In certain American states, abortions are delayed, so the child dies, the child ceases to have brain function, but the organs within the child's body can be harvested. Now, as a young man, I was all in favour of unlimited access to abortions, because I didn't think that the atrocities that are now law in New York State would become fact. No one did. We were warned by the Catholic Church of the slippery slope that lay ahead if abortion were permitted at 3 months. And we all said, no, the world doesn't work like that. The world does work like that. And the world is such that we have words like craniotomy and cranial perforator. These are legitimate tools to destroy a baby's brain inside the womb. A cranial perforator, a craniotomy. Within the realm of feminism, there are certain women who have officially become non-women, who are deprived of the status of womanhood by the fact that they're nuns. Some 20 years ago, perhaps rather less, there was a nun who was wrongly accused of rape, assisting of rape, called Nora Wall. And the extraordinary thing about the fate of Nora Wall, she was set up, she was entirely innocent, was that the feminists of Ireland didn't stand up for her. Here was a woman who was wrongly victimised. But because she was a woman, she was denied the rights of womanhood. I think the great antithesis, conflict within the Western world, can be focused on two events in 1968. One was Humanae Vitae, the papal encyclical which said the denial of the connection between sexuality and procreation was a great sin and would lead to human disaster. And like every other young person at that time, I ridiculed such suppositions. And the other event in 1968 was the catastrophic speech by Enoch Powell on the consequences of unlimited immigration. Neither of these great issues, immigration and of reproduction, of sexual freedom, really were then challenged over the subsequent decades, with the consequences that we see across Western Europe today. And in the emerging Ireland, that has gone through so many revolutions in the last 51 years, we have seen an entire class of nuns being treated as Nora Wall was. These are the Bon Secours sisters. They not merely have become non-women, they've become non-humans. You can say what you like about the Bon Secours sisters, and you don't have to be reminded of the truth that they came to the rescue of unmarried mothers in the 1920s, when no one else was prepared to do anything for them. It all began, if you like, in 1924, when the Archbishop of Tuam announced that he was conducting a trawl through the libraries of County Galway, looking for any literature that promoted the immorality of unmarried motherhood. And that's what they did, and the trawl was conducted by, or led by, the Professor of English Literature at University College Galway, Professor Howell. And in the Archiepiscopal mansion that Christmas, they had a bonfire of all the books that seemed to extol the virtues of unmarried motherhood. And all across Ireland, unmarried mothers were being hounded. In County Monaghan, the local county secretary said attempts to imprison unmarried mothers had, unfortunately, and his nice choice of words here, had proved abortive. In Carlow, a Father Donoghue castigated county authorities for not imprisoning, forgive me, castigated county authorities for the way they were treating unmarried mothers. Instead of showing them charity, they were locking them up in the county home like lunatics. And along came the Bon Secours sisters to give them home, to give them sanctuary when no one else was prepared to do so. So that the two people that stood up for unmarried mothers in the 1920s were both from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, which was to be castigated in later years for their treatment of unmarried mothers. Now, the treatment of unmarried mothers was shocking. But by our standards, it was shocking. It wasn't deemed to be shocking by the standards of the time. And in the recent inquiry into the Bon Secours sisters, a solicitor for the state said that the Bon Secours nun who'd been giving evidence was lying through her teeth as Bon Secours sisters normally did. This was an officer of the court. And what did the Council of Women in Ireland say? National Council? Nothing. No protection of these harmless women who had done their best. Their best wasn't good enough, we all know that. But they did so, whatever they did in the plain sight of the government and of the political parties and of An Garda Síochána. So, we have gone through so many phases in Irish life, denying the reality in front of us, looking for scapegoats whenever possible. And our latest phase is to treat the word misogyny as if it's a useful weapon against any realistic debate on how this society is emerging and how it's evolving, and what are the forces that are being liberated within this society. And any criticism of the feminist movement, such as I have made in the past and John Waters has made in the past, is always greeted with this word misogyny. Misogyny produces a number of inevitable consequences: isolation, marginalization, and abuse. And it's almost impossible to have a productive conversation about any issue whatever once you are called a misogynist. And because of the inability to discuss pressing matters, we have allowed transformations within our medical profession to have taken place which are now almost irreversible. Now, I'm not going to say feminism as alone the author of the collapse of the Irish medical profession. For collapse it is. Many factors are at work. One of them, the reason for the title of this talk, is feminism. 15 years ago, three women doctors analysed what was happening in the Irish medical profession, and they found that over half of female doctors ceased to practice by the age of 45, and the majority of female doctors ceased to practice at all before retirement age. So that instead of having the normal, as we have had historically, an over quota of doctors to whom we could export to the world, Ireland today has the highest dependence on foreign doctors of any country in the OECD. 38% of our doctors are from abroad. And I say it's not simply because of the feminization of the medical profession, but that is an unquestionable factor, because women do not want to work antisocial hours to the degree that men are prepared to do so. This is quite a complex question. Many are married, they've got families, they don't want to be working over weekends, they don't want to be working at night time. But you cannot ask a young 17-year-old girl who wants to do medicine, will you continue to practice medicine after you become a mother? You can ask her if she's going to practice obstetrics, but you can't ask her if she's going to be the subject of obstetrics. And this is the law. It's criminal to ask a young woman these questions, and perhaps for good reasons. But we have to be able to discuss this. The outcome of not discussing it is the transformation of our medical profession before our eyes without anyone talking about it. No decisions are being made for fear of the feminist lobby, for fear of the consequences in the social media, for fear within the political circles, which always bow before these quangos and groups that are subsidized by the state to create political agendas like egalitarian agendas and feminist agendas. The political classes will not take those groups on. The outcome today is that in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, there are 261 doctors called Patrick, 335 doctors named Mary, and 791 doctors with versions of Muhammad. Now, this is a transformation of our medical profession which really should have been discussed. It's never been discussed. When I raised this issue twice in the last 4 years, I was simply called an Islamophobe or a bigot or a misogynist. Did anyone take the points I was making aboard? No. As you're aware, I have been called a misogynist for events over a column that I wrote 18 months ago. It's a very poor column. I apologise, but that made no difference. And amongst the most strident criticism that I got came from the National Women's Council of Ireland. Not long after that newspaper column, Ali Salim, part-time academic and a member of the Islamic Cultural Institute, appeared on RTE calling for the legalisation of circumcision of women in Ireland. He said he was an advocate of female circumcision, and he said that it should be treated in the same way as male circumcision. The National Council of Women of Ireland said nothing whatever about this. According to newspaper reports at the time, 5,000 girls in Ireland have undergone genital mutilation. 5,000 girls. This is a real threat to the health and happiness and sexual future of young women in Ireland. But because the threat came from an outsider, from a Muslim, it was not taken seriously. Had I said something like that, well, you know what would have happened to me. We have a double value system that somehow or other, people, if they are of Muslim background, are treated with an immunity to consequence that the rest of us would not be. The rest of us particularly, if we are male and heterosexual and of a certain age. At that point, we become almost non-humans in our possession of human rights. But this is not an Irish phenomenon. 20 years ago, it was drawn to the attention of the police forces across England that little girls were being groomed, taken away, drunk, made drunk, given drugs and raped. Events that far exceeded anything that Enoch Powell had warned about in 1968 were becoming widespread across Britain. And for fear of offending the multicultural lobby, for fear of being called racist, the English police did nothing. Year after year after year. We know now that no less than 10,000 girls were drugged and raped. It could be 20, 30, 40,000. Irreversible ruin has been visited on their lives. Hundreds of men have been charged. Some scores have been imprisoned. Many more, no doubt, await imprisonment. And several factors, several thoughts emerge from that. The first, the most striking, is that various English feminist groups have said nothing whatever about this. They haven't urged the police to crack down harder on these Muslim gangs, and I'm sorry to say they are all Muslim gangs. They're silent about this, as they were silent, and the Irish sisters were silent about Ali Salim and his call to recognise female genital mutilation as a right to inflict on girls. So why? Why this silence? These are the worst things that could be done to these little girls if they are to be kept alive. Yet there was silence from the entire feminist thing. Now, in one aspect, you understand this, because much of feminism is class-driven. Feminists don't demand equal access to be working in sewers underground. They don't demand equal access to become bricklayers or scaffolders or steeplejacks. They want top jobs wearing white collars. That's fine. I want the same thing myself. But I don't purport to be seeking justice for the world. I'm just being me, maybe. Feminists say we want justice for our sisters, but not when they're white working class girls from the north of England, when they don't even know the north of England is. But there's another aspect too about the grooming of these girls and the rapes, about how men can behave and how men do behave, and how different men are from women. Because these were unspeakable events. And when women, feminists, say that men and women are divided by culture, not by natural instincts. It was Simone de Beauvoir who said that women are not born, they're made. Yet this isn't true. We all know it's not true. No culturalization of women could turn them into the sexual monsters that men can be. We all can be. We choose not to be. We've been acculturalized away from whatever bestiality is within our souls. We men. And not one of us in this room, I can imagine, can understand what those men were doing or how they could possibly do it, but we also recognize that they all were men. And we all recognize that women cannot do things like that. You cannot get 10 women to abduct a boy or a girl for their sexual pleasure for hours on end. You know this cannot happen. We are different sexes. We men have the Y chromosome and women do not have the Y chromosome. And up until a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have said that feminism had the trump card in these matters. That they could always play the perpetual victimhood. And victimhood does come easy. It's a card that is played the whole time in the whole feminist, the advancing of the feminist cause and the triumph of the feminist cause. It's always been about women as victims, not as perpetrators of deeds. And for the most part, I recognize the reality of this, that not as many women are put into hospital, not as many men, are put into hospital by women as vice versa. But in the strange mutations that occur in what we might call post-Christian society, where there are no rules and there are no certainties, and we believe in almost nothing, new political identities have emerged, and one is transgenderism. Now, I'm not denying that many people feel trapped in the wrong kind of body. But the complete collapse of critical faculties, the complete refusal to analyse what's going on, not just in Ireland, but everywhere in the English-speaking world, and also, I would gather, France, that if a 13-year-old says that she actually feels she should be a boy, or the 13-year-old boy, or even younger, says a comparable thing about his own ambitions to become a woman, those self-diagnoses are accepted as gospel truths in the way that no other observation by a 13-year-old would ever be accepted. And not merely are those diagnoses accepted, the therapies accepted, proposed by a 13-year-old are now taken as worthy of merit. Not merely as worthy of merit, but they offer and they service as a natural command to be obeyed by the medical profession. That means that the professionals are now subordinate to a pre-adolescent child who knows nothing about the world, and that whim caused by mental illness or genuine unhappiness or whatever the cause is taken as an authority. And any serious discussion on this, like so many discussions or so many subjects we've been talking about, no serious discussion has been made possible. And how is a 13-year-old now put in a position where he or she can commandeer not merely the technology and the expertise of the medical profession, but the political classes too, and the media classes? So that without any serious discussion, journalists are accepting the validity of the transgender obsession. Now, if you remember, 10 years ago, we were going through a terrible period of suicides in Ireland, and a great deal of these suicides were imitative. And if you have one young man, it was usually a young man, 9 out of 10 suicides are of young men as opposed to women. That's the ratio about them. You get a cluster of suicides in the same area. People do imitate one another, and particularly if they're unhappy, if they see that somehow or other suicide not merely is no longer a taboo way of ending your misery, but it's actually celebrated, so that the young men, young women to a lesser point, who took their own lives were then given enormous funerals, and finally, retrospectively, their entire lives were validated. And so too was the end that they chose. And other young people went the same path. We learned as a community, as a society, that we cannot allow suicide to be applauded like that, and suicides eased off. Certainly cluster suicides eased off. And now we have cluster transgenderism. But there never was a political lobby associated with, nor should there have been, with suicides. There is medico-political lobby to do in support of transgenderism. And online and social media, transgender activists will set about the destruction of any person who raises questions about the validity of the entire transgender industry and industry it has become. A woman in England recently had sent off her 13-year-old boy to be castrated. And when a Catholic, a woman in East Anglia, objected to that, she was subject to the grotesque vilification of being, this new word, transphobic. If you never even knew a phenomenon existed, how could you hate it? That's what phobic means. Yet it is a new version of misogynist. So this evening, this April evening in 2019, the key thing that will break any conversation, break any negotiation, end any serious understanding of anything is transphobia. If you are transphobic, you're a bad person. If you are a trans person, you're a better person than anyone else, and you're entitled to get what you want, to bring about the outcome that you want. no matter whether or not the outcome is going to be for your own good. And it goes back to humane vitae and the disconnect between sexuality and reproduction, which I thought once upon a time was a good thing, and in many ways it is a good thing, because we all like to have a good sex life. But that science has not yet invented a deed without consequence. We don't know when the consequence is going to be, and we don't know what the consequence will be. But there is no such thing as an event without an outcome. And what we've been doing over recent years is playing as if there are no outcomes to what we want. If you satisfy your own urges, and it might seem there are no outcomes, well, we do know the outcomes. We do know the outcomes are that 38% of doctors in Ireland are foreign born, and that 45% of the population of London are white British, 65% of foreign origin. One of the parallel features of transgenderism is the emergence of groups that on the outset seem to be wholly benign and without any downside to them, such as the campaign in Hollywood against sexual harassment of women, in particular, by studio bosses. Last year, a large number of women at the Oscars, actresses, were wearing black dresses in sympathy with the women who had been victims of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. They were very well dressed, they were very well cut black dresses, I can tell you. But Amy Schumer is an American comedian from New York City. And at around the time of the Oscars, she appeared in what was called the Celebrity Awards in London. And she walked on stage, and she's about 30 years of age. And she said, I'm at 160 pounds right now, and I can catch a dick anywhere I want, anytime I want. That's the kind of woman I am. She was discussing this assertion with a journalist in The Observer later on, and I read the interview. And this episode was discussed, and the two woman journalist and the comedian, laughed about it and laughed approvingly. And then they got on to the Me Too campaign about sexual harassment and victimization in Hollywood. And Amy Schumer said, yeah, it's about time these guys stopped treating us as sex objects. This is in the same interview. And she didn't hear the contradiction, and nor did the journalist who was talking to her. And she said, then some of my own male friends need to be called out on this. Mariella Frustrop is, she used to live in County Wicklow. Family came, Norwegian, Danish, lived in Ireland for a while. Now she's quite big on English television. She has an advice column, also in The Observer. And it's in the same edition of The Observer that I saw a letter from a reader saying that she worked for a political party. She was married at the time, and sitting at a desk with her boss. And the boss touched her knee. Just brushed it, hand against her knee. And he apologized, and then a couple of minutes later he did it again. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to report myself for sexually harassing you. And they both laughed. And the woman's marriage subsequently broke up, and she had an affair with this man, the man who twice brushed her knee. And the affair came to an end, as affairs do. And nonetheless, she remained in touch with him, and she used his personal commendation for her LinkedIn profile, and she used a letter of recommendation from him for job applications. And the letter to Marielle Fresstrup was this: should I now report him for sexual harassment? And Marielle Fresstrup said, undoubtedly. There will be other women who are victims like you. There must be no equivocation on this. Historic sex abuse must be called out when it's seen. Now, the extraordinary thing is that these two interviews, these two episodes, one an interview, the other a reply to a reader's letter, caused no perturbation whatever, no consternation. It's as if the ordinary powers of analysis have been suspended. And I think they've been suspended because people don't know what the rules are anymore. They don't know when absurdity is really absurdity. They have no grasp of how common sense has been abandoned. This woman had an affair with a man she wants to denounce for having earlier touched her knee twice, and she didn't complain at the time. Should she? Yes, apparently. The right thing for her to do is to spare her sisters similar abuse. And it goes on. In December last year, the Scottish Parliament decided that gingerbread men that were available in the Scottish Parliament buildings every Christmas should no longer be called gingerbread men because it was a sexist term. And they were renamed. Now, I happened to have been in London the next day, and I was at the Connaught Hotel with my wife, and we ordered afternoon tea. And the waiter came down with the afternoon tea, and he said, first of all, he said, we have these gingerbread and quite clearly he's been briefed. And he paused, he tried to remember the word he should use. He said, gingerbread dips. In a way it's funny. But this is this kind of unthinking submission to random whims is the path to a tyranny where you do not know what the rules can ever be. You have no sense of what is the right thing to do or say on any given morning. And one of the strange characteristics of this strange society that we're in is that commercial organizations no longer belong to an organization that's interested in financial outcome, but they're interested in propaganda. The Gillette advertisement of earlier on this year, which simply castigated men for being awful. Now, we know that men can be awful, men can be heroic. Would women have sacrificed their lives like the firemen of 9/11 for complete strangers? If you were women in this audience, would you want a fireman to run up 50 stories to rescue you, or a firewoman? What would you want? We know the more likely outcome is you're going to be rescued because men just have that madness that will cause them to do imprudent things. Yet Gillette ad was all about men having no virtues, that we will, of our own volition, abuse women, mistreat them, mistreat children, behave badly, as if we are without benign instinct, without the instructions from someone like Gillette. Last Christmas, Johnny Walker Whiskey decided to capitulate to the pressure that they felt about them, and they introduced a new whiskey called Jane Walker. Women don't drink much whiskey, but in order to keep the feminist lobby happy, they have introduced this Jane Walker whiskey. God, the Church of England is now abandoning the term God the Father. Not just merely to placate women, but also out of concern for transgenderism. Martina Navratilova, who I thought could never capitulate to anyone, great tennis player, very strong personality. She came out as a lesbian early on in her career, being straightforward about what she is. And she said, it is madness that pseudo-women with male bodies are allowed to enter women's tennis tournaments. They're not women. They've got men's bodies. Merely because their genitals have been removed doesn't make them women. I say their genitals have been removed. Just a brief diversion. Of 14,000 transgenders examined in America in the last 10 years, only 1,000 of the 14,000 males transitioning to women have actually had their genitals removed. The other 13,000 remain men, but with male bodies. They've had hormone implants, so they have breasts, but physically they are men. But they not merely regard, they are entitled to call themselves in law, both in American law and in British law, maybe Irish law too, I'm not quite sure of that. They're allowed to call themselves women and use women's toilets. Anyway, Martina Navratilova said, this is madness. These are quite clearly not women. They're men. They look different from women. They've got different bodies. She was hounded into silence. She said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be re-educated on these matters. And that's exactly the language one would have heard had one been around in the 1930s and listening to the show trials in Moscow. The way to avoid going to a show trial and being executed was to say, I need re-education. We saw the same thing in Cambodia in the 1970s when the Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge were triumphant and people were mandatorily re-educated. And if they couldn't be re-educated, they were murdered. We're not going through a process of murder now, but we are going through a process of ideological reorientation, which means that nobody knows anything for certain. Martina Navratilova emerged from her 2 months of re-education and said that she hadn't changed her mind. She'd examined her mind and she said these tennis players are not women, they're men. And she was again promptly vilified. And that story hasn't come to an end, because we've got women's tennis being taken over by men at very low level at the moment. But sooner or later, not just women's tennis, women's athletics will be colonized by pseudo-women with male bodies and possibly male genitals, testes and penises. And in no sense are they women. But no one dare challenge them, just as no one dare challenge the claims of feminists. And the feminists created a language where, as I said to you before, and just give you a couple of examples of victimhood, where it was impossible for a woman to be an oppressor, to be a murderer. Corporal Gary Cotter, member of the Defence Forces, had a disagreement with his wife. She wanted to stay in her pub and get drunk. He wanted to go home. He was on duty the next morning. He went home. She came back at 3 o'clock in the morning, vomited all over the place. He got out of bed because he had to get up at 7. He went to the spare bedroom. She went to bed, got up in the morning, went downstairs, got a shotgun, came upstairs, shot him dead in bed. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter, was allowed to walk free from the court. Declan O'Neill was hit by his wife 26 times with a hammer and knifed 21 times. He was in bed. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was found guilty because she pleaded guilty. And it was claimed in the court she had been the victim of an abusive husband who regularly got drunk and beat her. As it happened, Declan O'Neill had kept a diary of what was happening to him and had also told his friends and his family. He'd twice been to Tala Hospital for wounds inflicted by his wife. His family had kept an account of what had been done to him. The state pathologist said that his liver showed that he was a very rare drinker. Yet Dolores O'Neill walked free because she was a woman. Now, the really depressing thing about this is that when I wrote about both of these cases, there were letters of support published at that time in the Irish Times. But there was no reverberation through the political classes. No reverberation through the professional classes, the legal classes, or the media classes. Because people have learnt you don't take on the feminist lobby, the feminist quangos, not merely National Council of Women, which are enormously powerful. That's to say the members are enormously powerful. There are so many cross-supporting, politically correct institutions in Irish life, which means if you take on one, you take on all. If you take on misogyny, if you take on the feminist thing and you'll call it misogynist, you'll probably find the National Migrants Council on your case as well, and so on and so forth. And no politician wants to be confronted with a massed rank of opponents who could destroy their career. And one of the things I have come to observe is that men will not confront not merely feminism. They hate disagreeing with women in public because it makes them seem as if they're a bully. Now, you know, if we're going to have a discussion later on, and the chances are it's going to be very civil. But if one of the women present were to seek a serious conflict with me, I think I'd probably back down. Maybe not. We don't know. But it is a feature of life that men don't want to appear to be disagreeing with women in public. It's the way we are these days. Now, obviously, in the era that has passed, grotesque injustices were done to women. Not just by men, but by women too. The unmarried mothers about whom I began this conversation, they were victims not merely of the male society that dominated Irish life, not merely of the individual men who got them pregnant and then apparently abandoned them. They were abandoned by women too. Our relationships are very complex. We all of us need a father and a mother. We need the complementary powers and influences the two have on our lives. But even to defend the traditional nuclear marriage now is virtually impossible in the dispensations that rule across the Western world. I myself see that the culture that has made Europe the birthplace of the modern world, which gave the world its greatest literature, that invented the symphony orchestra and symphony music and the great concerti of the world, that invented the great literature of the world. All of these outpourings are ultimately the creation of our Christian secular tradition. That Christian secular tradition, which, as I said before, has to and must embrace Judaism. That tradition is also the begetter of tolerance. And tolerance has begotten intolerance, because we dare not say we don't like intolerance, because that seems an intolerance itself. But maybe the catastrophic fire last night in Paris will be a reminder of how much we owe to Christianity and how much we certainly stand to lose if we lose touch with our roots. Thank you.